So this movie is from a French film director, author named Christian Voltman. This is his idea, and he wrote and directed it. And the film is from 2019 called The Room, and you can find it on Shudder. So tell us what it's all about.
Yes, first of all, not to be confused with either The Room or Room with Brie Larson.
Or The Room or the other room.
Or The Room with Tommy Wiseau. This is not the same.
Yeah. Or Panic Room or Escape Room or anything that has, there's remarkably, when you have to look stuff up on The Room, there's a lot of shit out there.
The Room is horrifying for other reasons, the one with Tommy Wiseau, but hilarious reasons. All of them very hilarious reasons. I'm like, that's a good test to watch that with different people, because when I watch that, I'm laughing pretty much through the whole thing. And depending on who you're watching it with, there's always like a group of people. If you're in there with 5 people, there's always like 3 people that won't laugh throughout the entire movie. And usually one other person that's in there with you watching it will be laughing along with you. But anyways, that's a completely different movie. Okay, all right. So The Room, this is a sort of it kept boomeranging back to me. I'd seen it a while back on Shudder. I watched it again, and I just watched it again because it got meaning to talk about it. So it has like this Twilight Zone feel to it. Basically, this married couple, they go to this place and they can't have a kid. And so they go to this place that they probably get for cheap or whatnot, but they discover that there is it's a fixer-upper basically, but there's a room there that's blocked off. The husband finds the key to it, opens it up, and they discover that when they go in this room and wish for something, anything will materialize that they want. So now they can materialize whatever they want, but it's in the confines of this room and it can't leave the room. So let's say like they wish for $1 million. They go out of there with the money, and all of a sudden the money turns to ash. So you can see where this would go into play, like since they can't have a kid, and like what would happen after there and how that could become a horror movie after that. But the Twilight Zone element of it is what I really dug. And there's a lot of movies with similar themes like that, like we were talking about before we started recording, that have this immediate forgiveness or enhancement of suspension of disbelief because it has a Twilight Zone angle to it.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the film school word that we used to call about it, is the suspension of disbelief, which I always thought was a pretty cool. It basically, there's lots of movies that employ suspension of disbelief, and suspension of disbelief can also be ruined in a hurry. And essentially it's like, hey, we're going to introduce something here that makes zero fucking sense, but you're going to believe it because of the way we present it, and probably because of previous tropes and ideas and things you've seen out there. Like when he opens up the door and he wishes for something, the lights dim and magically it appears in the room. We accept that. We're like, oh, okay, that's what this movie's about. And then it becomes, now for you and I, at the end of the film, there were some little things that went on that might have broken that suspension of disbelief. It maybe for me, maybe less for you, but yeah, it's about that Twilight Zone employed this all the time. And I think it's something that, you know, it can be small. Like we can talk about a Sasquatch movie and instantly the suspension of disbelief is that Yeti exist.
It's built into the ride that you're going to go on, because that's part of the advertisement for the ride is like, okay, the suspension of disbelief, it's a magic show and pretty much anything can happen and accept all forms of weirdness. That's sort of what every episode of the Twilight Zone was based upon. You knew that like weird shit was going to happen, or shit that like came out of nowhere, or just something that was strange or sort of off-putting, and you automatically accepted it. I never thought once on that show about suspension of disbelief. On this one, I did think about it, but that's because it's a longer form. Usually Twilight Zone are the shorter episodes. Like the older ones at least are like right around like half an hour. But that's why the newer ones don't work for me as much, because they're longer. But the suspension of disbelief, I think, plays better into the fact that if it's a shorter movie or an anthology, this one, it only took me out a little bit of it, but by the time it got to that point where they started crossing the threshold of suspension of disbelief, I was in for the ride already, and I just liked all the weird shit that was happening.
For me, it got really, I mean, we could talk about it. Well, talk about it later as we kind of get through the plot of it. But yeah, it was kind of at that end when all of a sudden they kind of did the Inception thing where I was just like, oh, okay, now you're being confusing for the sake of being confusing. But we'll take a step back. It's done by this guy, Christian Voltman. I believe it's about his third feature. He's actually known, he was an animator and an artist. He did video games, got into short films, And his first feature, and what he's probably best known for, is a 2006 film called Renaissance, which is a motion capture animation film.
Oh, I remember when that one came out. I haven't seen it, but I remember it had like the kind of comic booky Sin City sort of look on the outside of the cover for it. And it was sort of like, wasn't it sort of like a rotoscope sort of feel to it or whatnot?
Yeah,
Like black and white kind of thing.
Yeah, it was black and white.
Like a noir sort of. Yeah, I was thinking the noir, like detective kind of.
It was French. It had Jonathan Pryce, Daniel Craig, were voicing stuff. Okay. So that was his film that came out, and he's kind of well known for that. That kind of went. I mean, it's a cool idea, black and white dystopian film. It did not do well, but it got a cult following after the fact. And that is kind of was his first foray in what he was known for. So he's a pretty visual guy, and there were some scenes in this film that really you could tell. Like there's the scene where we were talking about before too, where he breaks into the wall and he's going through the wall, and it just seems to go on forever. And there's these cables, and that he's trying to get through, and it's just like this visual nightmare. Also, like you could see down below in the basement where that timed flux capacitor that was in the bottom that was driving the whole house. You could tell by the design of that. It's just like, okay, someone who's a visual artist is actually doing some thought here. But so that's the guy. This is, I think, this is about his third feature. Nothing super big out of him, but I mean, it's a really good effort. Like I found it entertaining, the whole thing. Now, of interest that we can chat about, which again, for low budget filmmakers, taking an idea like this, all took place in one house.
Yeah, this to me was like big, like a very good description of like big sort of world inside of like one small location. And also you can sort of cheat it too in the other way. So you're like, okay, so we're in one location, but if you wish for something else to appear in this location, it could look like it's another location in that one location and make that one location become bigger. Like, and not only like with theoretically, but like visually it's bigger, and like you're seeing a lot more things than you're just seeing in that like one location that's limited. But it uses the one location to sort of branch out and go into different directions for it. But other ones are limited too, that are stuck in where they can't use that Twilight Zone angle for it to show different places. Yeah.
But realistically, like as a filmmaker, he found a fucking creepy, weird house.
Yeah.
Secured it, and then basically came up with an idea that confined him to that house, and which like they could have hammered out this movie in a couple weeks, right? Like it's and that's, I always like you got to respect films and to filmmakers who, when they're writing stuff, I mean, we talked about it before, scope creep, right? Like can you do a big story in one small location so it feels so much bigger than it is, but you're there, and this does a good job of that.
Oh yeah.
And so like as a filmmaker, even if you have a big idea, can it all take place in one location? And this one did. They even had that kind of subplot, which really wasn't a subplot, where the guy who was in jail, when he finds out that someone was murdered in the house before, and they had to go see the guy in the psych ward. Even that was basically, it could have been shot anywhere, right?
Yeah,
that was an afternoon, type of thing. So it had this like big feel, like, okay, this house has history. Previous owners were murdered. What's the story there? And that's a twist within that happens in the movie. And then even though they had all that incorporated into it, it still barely ever left the house. So when you look at other, I mean, we've talked lots about movies that have done that, what we just like Stay Out of the Fucking Attic, which is also on Shudder. That's another one that takes place all in a house, has a bigger idea, and I mean, I think when you look at those, I think there's lots of films we can think of that all take place in one location. So that's really notable within this for sure. The other thing is, there's two things. Before we get to the Twilight Zone aspect, there's a cool kind of be careful what you wish for theme.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about it because it's something that, I mean, it's as a filmmaker or a screenwriter, more so, when you're coming up with an idea, having this in the back of your head, the theme of be careful what you wish for, it's a total universal theme that everyone kind of does. And it's kind of funny, like thinking about it, it's not properly exploited as much as like, say, nature versus nurture or other kind of themes like that. But be careful what you wish for. And I was trying to think of movies that do it. Obviously the big one, as a horror fan, Wishmaster has delved deep into be careful what you wish for. Monkey's Paw, which I think Monkey's Paw was remade. wasn't it?
Oh, what Monkey's Paw was remade at least once. I think it was remade a couple of times. I think there was like
and the Monkey's Paw thing too is like that was more direct. It's like you wish for something, you get it, but then something has to happen to justify that thing. If that was...
yeah, it's got a negative side effect. So it looks like there was so there's a Monkey's Paw in 1933, then in 48, and then in 2013.
Yeah, that's that series or that idea that really explores the be careful what you wish for deal. But it does it doubles down on that. It's sort of like, okay, I wish for $1 million. It's great. Okay, you got the $1 million, but then your parents had to die and you inherited it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, so it has it has the direct consequence of actually getting it to you. This one was more stepped outside of it because you got it.
Yeah.
But there was a catch.
A lot of those like Tales from the Crypt episodes, or like a lot of different horror anthologies, they're like that will use that Monkey's Paw sort of formula where like somebody gets something that they wish for and then something terrible happens, or their greed gets out of control and they destroy themselves, or in some way it like leads to their own destruction.
Yeah, I mean, and
or someone else's destruction. Yeah,
and I haven't seen it, but you were saying too. There's like obviously the this is the opposite of say like the genie, right? Like
right.
But were you saying that there's evil? Like I was thinking, like man.
Well, there's a movie called Jinn, 2013. So a couple returns from a trip and discover the new apartment has been built on a site that is home to some malevolent being. So that might just be like a genie torturing them, maybe not granting them wishes, or. But the Jinn is, I believe, like an abbreviation for genie. But I think there's a couple other movies about like evil killer genies.
Yeah, because the evil genie is kind of I'm trying to think. Nothing really stands out. That's something that could be totally explored.
Yeah.
Right. Like, hey, I'm like, because I actually do think it's a cool theme. Like, hey, man, I'm going to give you everything you want to, but just know there's going to be a consequence with it.
Yeah, they're going to trick your ass. So I guess so evil genie movies would be looking at Wishmaster as the most popular one, then Jinn. There's not really any other movies that pop up here looking at it. So I guess that like there's a big hole to fill, or
there's a big hole to fill,
big lamp to fill for evil genie horror movies.
It's actually kind of it's kind of funny because it is a character that's existed forever, and even Wishmaster isn't really. God, it's been so long since I've seen a Wishmaster film, but I don't think the Wishmaster, like you didn't give him a wish, like he was the consequence, if I remember correctly.
Well, I think he grants you a wish and then he screws you over. He has like all these ways.
So he's kind of like kind of an evil genie.
Yeah.
I mean, that's and the other one that popped in my head about be careful what you wish for, although it explores it in a different way, is Would You Rather.
One of the great Jeffrey Combs, and then like Brittany Snow's in that as well too.
Yeah, it was kind of a cool, like that was basically you signed off on your ability to win a bunch of money or do something, and they made it seem really easy, so everyone signed up, and then they played that evil game of Would you rather? Would you rather, put a razor blade in your eyeball, or chop off your finger, like, and then you had to complete the task, and the winner at the end would get $1 million or whatever it might be. But that it kind of explored that, hey, everyone wanted in on the chance to win something, and be careful what you wish for, because it's not going to, the path isn't going to be too fun.
Yeah, another great use of like one location, because it's basically like a dinner party. People are trying to get their wishes granted, and
that's right.
And Jeffrey Combs is hosting it. And then he has like the deck loaded in his favor to make sure that as many people can get eliminated as possible.
That's right. And then the whole thing took place in that basement room, right? Like, as they started at the dinner party and they went down to the basement. Again, single location, smart filmmaking. So after that, like the big kind of thing that we talked about was the suspension of disbelief and the Twilight Zone type aspect of just really throwing something weird out there and accepting it. Twilight Zone did it like awesome. I mean, you can see it in almost every sci-fi. I mean, realistically, from every sci-fi to horror movie, you walk in, like, even from Nightmare on Elm Street to whatever, it's like, oh no, this is what happens. Stuff happens in your dreams, and the guy can be pulled in and out. Like, that's a suspension of disbelief of stuff. But the Twilight Zone aspect is actually, you're right. Like, you can set up any sort of weird shit that you want, because that's what people are signing up for, and they're gonna believe it. And this did a really good job at it. It blew it for me at the end. So, like, just to, I don't know if anyone's going to see it, they can go ahead and see it. But I'll kind of say, at the ending, basically, what happens is they go into the room, and the kid has decided to wish for the entire outside to be within the room, kind of thing. You go into the room, and then all of a sudden, once he gets into the room, he's outside, and he now runs through the woods, and he finds his house again, and goes into the house again, and there's a room. This is where it gets kind of Inception-like, and then there's a room within a room, and then like obviously they could just keep going on forever down this road of rooms within rooms, but also they figured out how to copy each other. So I wish for a copy of me, or I think the son at one point said like, I wish to.
He wished he could be a copy of the father.
A copy of the father. And then all of a sudden we get at this end bit here. And it's really the last 5 to 10 minutes where it's, you don't know which house within a house within a house you're in. And you don't know which character within a character within a character you're in. And kind of at the end, I'm like, okay, I see what you're doing here, but we're getting a little difficult just for the sake of getting difficult. Like this, we could have reeled this in a little bit more, and that it kind of broke that suspension of disbelief for me a little bit. But I always find copying yourself to be problematic. There's I can't think of one way that copying yourself works outside of Terminator 2. In Terminator 2, when T-1000 was copying people and turned into Sarah Connor at the end, that actually made sense to me because that was, baked into it. I always find it problematic when you copy yourself, unless you're doing it funny, like Time Crimes or Triangle, where it becomes kind of like a humorous take on copying yourself. That's the only time it broke it for me. Otherwise, I'll be honest, I completely bought into the fact that there's a room that grants wishes.
Just wish that they'd make more places like that. They should make a place like that on like those home improvement shows, and then all of a sudden, like the owners just disappear. And it turns into actually, I think like those home improvement shows are getting really weird now. They're starting to do some on like murder houses, and they're starting to make some of them like horror movie like. I mean, talk about like running out of ideas.
Yeah. I mean,
I might start watching some of those home improvement shows if they did that, because otherwise it wouldn't be so freaking boring.
Yeah. I also wonder about Twilight Zone or creep show ideas and stuff that like, it is interesting that they drew this out into a feature, because it's very well could have been a short, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It could have been
or like an anthology even, like, but I appreciate they did a feature. I do think that like you do start thinking about like the concept too much if it's like a feature length movie, whereas if it's a short, you don't, and especially if it's in an anthology and it goes right into the next episode, you don't question it as much, but you do start to think about it a little bit more if it's like an hour and a half or more. See, on the other hand, like if you're doing, something with a concept like this, it's going to be less budget if you just stretch this out to a feature, as opposed to making an anthology, filming in different locations and everything else like that. So in a lot of ways, it does work into the favor. So for the most part, I think it was really effective to me.
Yeah.
And it kept coming back to me as a movie that I should recommend, because it stuck out as something that was cool with that Twilight Zone angle to it. Plus the actors were great in it. Like that really helped carry it through.
There was recently a Spanish film that I had seen. God, I wish it was total Twilight Zone, but essentially, and I don't know if you've seen this or not, it was like black and white Spanish film. Maybe not even Spanish. It could have been, but anyhow. Basically, they were in a train. Have you seen this one where they run into a train station? Total indie film. They go into a train station. The guy shows up. He's got a beard or whatever. Slowly over time, it's a storm outside, but slowly over time, everyone in the train station starts turning into him.
Oh no, I haven't seen that one. No.
And it's a feature. And so then all of a sudden they blame him, right? Because they're like, he's the bad guy, obviously. And by the end of it, it had to do with aliens, and it was a total Twilight Zone concept that they teased out into a feature. And of course, I can't remember the title of it right now, but I remember thinking, what a weird fucking movie. I think it was on Netflix. I think the takeaway kind of is there's a lot of these themes and a lot of these Twilight Zone ideas that we fully accept because of suspension of disbelief. And maybe, it's worth going back to check out a lot of this stuff, because, hey, maybe there's an idea in there that you can take and can turn into a feature idea or something that, there's a lot, like I said, a lot of tropes and stuff that are just fully accepted tropes, and they could be features.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like so when you have like the Twilight Zone angle to it, it's like in having a deck of cards with that card in there that lets you win every hand because you're able to, or just because it covers you for that suspension. It's like that extra magic card, basically, that sort of covers more of your bases, but which helps quite a bit, because in any other like regular movie, you would question the shit a lot more. So,
yeah.
Because other movies just have like coincidences. They don't have magic explaining everything, But sometimes, like, if you explain too much in these sort of situations, then you have to explain the rules of it. But if you don't really set up the rules as much, then you have less to explain or less to cover your bases on. But it seems like when you're dealing with like magic kind of shit, the more you try and explain, the less it works out, or like the less suspension of disbelief there is.
I agree, and I think it's kind of refreshing to see like a new idea like this too, because I think that like you said, a lot of people go down the regular roads where it's like, oh, it's a ghost movie, the regular tropes that are accepted right now. But there's a lot of shit out there that will give suspension of disbelief to, just because we've seen it before, it's set up the right way. I think it's yeah. I mean, in my mind, because we were talking about Creepshow and we're talking about Twilight Zone, that I think they're worth exploring, to go back and see stuff that could be redone.
They're usually kind of like these morality things too, like the Twilight Zone angle in them, because Tales from the Crypt did that a lot. Like the way the Tales from the Crypt would get around like the ratings thing is they would, because they'd always have like this morality at the end of it. So like you could show all the gruesome shit that you wanted to, as long as the person that was making the wrong decisions paid for it in some way. And that's like, you see that in the Creepshow movies and stuff too. There's so many great episodes in Twilight Zone, the original Twilight Zone series.
Yeah, but you're right. They typically have a moral or a twist at the end, right? Yeah, I mean, I think they're like, because realistically, that's what you're talking about with The Room, that it has a story, that, be careful what you want for, what you're looking for. And that's really what this whole point is, that there's a moral to the story, and it's kind of like an evil moral.
Yeah, you ever watch like there was the spin-off ones, there was like Monsters, and then there was The Outer Limits, and then there was Tales from the Dark Side. Those were all sort of like similar, not like necessarily as clever as a Twilight Zone, although they all had like really cool episodes in them. Twilight Zone is overall my favorite, but they all sort of rode on that this weird sort of like, no, Twilight Zone sort of balanced it out. Some episodes would be darker, some would be lighter, some would be like straight up sci-fi. That's what's so cool about Twilight Zone, is it could go anywhere. Other shows that were sort of like Tales from the Dark Side or Monsters or Outer Limits would stay kind of like more sci-fi horror based, but they were all like really cool. So it had like, Twilight Zone inspired quite a few shows that were able to use that concept of weirdness for its suspension of disbelief factor.
Yeah, what's actually, I mean, it is cool because you're allowed to explore it. And one that I would even throw in there as well, which I was a big fan of, was the X-Files. Because X-Files,
absolutely, yeah.
Because X-Files kind of did that too, where they had their overrunning like plot, but they had subplots that were kind of individual stories that because what you signed up for is that basically that Fox and Mulder explore the weird shit that's going on in the world. You were okay that there were different weird shit that went on in the world. Like you bought into that. And sometimes that was very kind of like exploring separate storylines, and some would reoccur, some would not. And it explored that really well. And it's, yeah, it's just to say all this to kind of tie it all back together here, is that The Room took what is essentially a Twilight Zone type concept, where there's a lesson to be learned, be careful what you wish for, explores it and expanded into a feature length film, made it work. And I think you see these all the time, and I think it's worth looking at these anthologies and looking at these short stories, and then also like when you're thinking about stuff. And I remember as a screenwriter in screenwriting classes, you'd always want to boil it down to that theme, right? Like, what is that theme? And then you could always keep that theme in mind as you're writing your script, because there's a purpose behind it. And obviously, when you look at Twilight Zone, there was always that theme. Twilight Zone always had a theme. There was a story and a lesson to be learned. And if you kind of keep those ideas in mind when you're writing, I think, it can really tie a script together. But I think all the Outer Limits, Twilight Zone, X-Files, all that stuff is worth rewatching in a way, because there's all these little storylines and things that are in there that, take it and see if there's a feature in there that can be done. Especially if it can be done in one house in one location, and you can
and Twilight Zone is like, it's a great inspiration for all kinds of ideas, because when you watch it, it sort of sparks your imagination when you watch Twilight Zone, because it does so many different things, and it has so many different ideas of so many different kinds of range. that will really kind of like get you excited about watching movies or get excited about like making something or writing something. I'm always have that reaction when I watch the Twilight Zone, when I watch those old episodes of the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, and having it in that short form allows you to kind of tell that story, that short, like because it's basically, it's almost like those short stories can almost be set up just like a joke. It's set up, punchline,
Yeah.
you know, and lesson at the end. And but that's really all they're doing. It's right. It's like, hey, let's set it up at the beginning. Oh, this is what's actually going on. There's the punchline, and then it's done. But how can you take those themes and ideas and extrapolate them into something longer and bigger? And I think there's a lot of stuff out there. And I did like that. I mean, it's one of the things about The Room that I liked, was that it was different. Like, this is not, it's not, hey, we got a house, it's haunted, or hey, we got a house and there's a serial killer on the loose. You know, it was, hey, we got a house and there's a room in it that grants you wishes. Like, I haven't seen this yet. I haven't seen this before. And it was cool to see. So my takeaway on the whole thing is, yeah, it's very different. It's very cool. They explored it really well. And I think there's a lot of, when you tie it and look at like Twilight Zone and all these different ones, they're worth re-exploring because there's a lot of ideas there.
Yeah, definitely.